The younger cohort, fresh out of business school with sleek laptops, were less subtle. Did they finally phase out paper people, or is that just legacy overhead? One whispered, barely concealing his smirk, as Joanna passed with contracts requiring signatures. Another scoffed, who even uses paper anymore? We're a tech company, Joanna. Get with the program. They saw her meticulous filing and hard copies as anachronisms, not the bedrock of regulatory compliance. She was a relic, a testament to an era they were eager to erase. The air hummed with talk of the $600 million merger, a deal Bryce championed with zeal. He saw it as his legacy, a clean slate, a bold leap. Joanna, however, saw it as a hastily assembled house of cards, built on shaky foundations. Her quiet warnings about procedural quirks and forgotten clauses in decades-old agreements were swept aside as minutiae. "We don't need to dwell on the past, Joanna," Bryce had declared, waving a dismissive hand. "We're innovating, remember? Future forward." Then came the inevitable. A private meeting with Bryce and HR. No pretense. Bryce, looking uncomfortable but self-satisfied, slid a thick envelope across the table. "Joanna," he began, finally getting her name right, though it felt more like an accusation. "We're streamlining operations ahead of the merger. Your position, it's being phased out. We appreciate your decades of dedicated service." He recited boilerplate severance terms: 2 months' pay, basic benefits, standard NDA. He spoke of new synergies and optimizing human capital, words that tasted like ash, but evoked no surprise. Her face remained impassive. No tears, no outburst, no pleas. The only visible reaction was the slight curl of her lips, a slow, imperceptible smile. It was the kind of smile one reserved for funerals they secretly celebrated, for promises silently kept. She took the severance package, her fingers brushing the crisp paper, her gaze already fixed with unwavering clarity on a future Bryce couldn't even begin to imagine. He assumed she would sign, disappear, become another forgotten footnote. But Joanna knew better. She knew the house. And soon, everyone else would too. The severance package, still warm from Bryce's dismissive hand, lay on Joanna's desk. Its crisp paper spoke of finality, of an ending she was expected to accept. She ran a thumb over the company logo, a tree with roots that had once seemed to stretch deep into her own life. Outwardly, she presented the same placid, agreeable demeanor she'd perfected over 2 decades, the one that allowed her to glide unseen through the bustling corridors, absorbing details no one else bothered to notice. Internally, a cold, precise plan was already crystallizing. She offered a small, polite nod to the HR representative who had delivered the envelope, murmuring a vague, "I'll review it shortly." She would review it, yes, but she certainly wouldn't be signing it. Not yet. The hum of the office, once a familiar comfort, now felt like a buzzing hive of oblivious drones, preparing for a future they believed was theirs to command. Joanna waited until the late afternoon, when the fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows and most of the new, eager faces had departed. With a quiet grace that belied her years, she slipped away from her desk. Her destination wasn't the elevator to freedom, but a rarely visited, dust-laden corner of the building's basement, a place most younger employees didn't even know existed. It was the physical repository of Evergreen Tech Solutions history, a testament to the days before digital archives rendered physical records obsolete. A place she, and only she, knew intimately. A faint smile, a private, knowing curve of her lips, touched her face. The quiet architect had found her blueprint. Back at her apartment, the glow of her laptop illuminated her face. She carefully drafted an email, concise and devoid of explicit details, to Eleanor Vance, a sharp outside counsel she'd consulted years ago on a minor personal matter. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding historic corporate documentation and potential oversight." She hinted at a complex, possibly overlooked clause in an older operating agreement, suggesting it might have implications for a large-scale corporate transaction. She didn't reveal her name or her company, only enough to pique Eleanor's professional curiosity. The trap was set. Now she just had to wait for the first tremors. The tremors began subtly, a faint ripple in the corporate calm. First, an unscheduled closed-door meeting of senior executives, their faces tight, their usual morning banter replaced by clipped, urgent whispers in the hallways. Then, the electronic calendar, usually a beacon of meticulously planned progress, started flashing red with canceled appointments and hastily rescheduled merger review sessions. The hum of the office, typically a predictable rhythm, became punctuated by frantic phone calls and the low thrum of escalating anxiety. Joanna, still occupying her familiar desk, a stark, quiet sentinel in the open-plan battlefield, observed it all with the detached precision of a seasoned cartographer mapping a storm. She wasn't just observing, she was cataloging. The way Bryce's polished veneer began to crack, replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of his eye. The hushed tones of Eleanor Vance's assistant, fielding calls that seemed to grow more agitated with each passing hour. The general air of bewildered frustration that settled over the executive floor, a scent she knew well. They were scrambling, not understanding. A ghost in the machine, a glitch in their perfectly charted acquisition. Her own inbox remained quiet, a testament to her effective corporate erasure. Yet, it was precisely this invisibility that afforded her the perfect vantage point. She saw the new hires, previously so dismissive, now looking up nervously from their screens, sensing the unease, but unable to pinpoint its source. They assumed the paper people were gone, that all inefficiency had been purged. They had no idea the deepest, most critical inefficiency was their own collective blindness. Then came the email. Not to her corporate address, but to the discreet personal one she'd provided Eleanor Vance. The subject line, follow-up, unforeseen complication. The content was terse, professional, and delivered the precise confirmation Joanna had been waiting for. Arthur P., lead counsel for Sterling Capital Partners, had sent an urgent query. A minor, yet legally binding, historical anomaly had been uncovered within Evergreen Tech Solutions' foundational documents, specifically an operating agreement from 2003 regarding intellectual property transfer. Arthur P.'s inquiry, relayed by Eleanor, mentioned a fractional stakeholder, an individual whose explicit consent was now deemed essential for the merger to proceed. Joanna allowed herself a faint, internal smile. The key had turned. Later that afternoon, a junior assistant, looking harried, approached Bryce's open office door. "Sir, Ms. Vance's office is calling again. They're saying Arthur P. is insistent about some legacy clause? Something about a stakeholder from 2003. Bryce, mid-gesture, threw his hand up. Legacy clause? God, what now? Just tell them it's corporate clutter. Another piece of administrative flotsam. It's nothing, Eleanor can handle it. We are not stopping a $600 million deal for some ancient paperwork. Get rid of it, tell them we'll sort it after the acquisition. Focus on closing." His voice, usually modulated for maximum impact, was frayed, a telltale sign of rising panic. He glared at his desk, as if the problem itself was an inanimate object he could simply wish away. He didn't even glance up as he spoke, certainly not at the quiet, unassuming figure still at her desk, just visible in his peripheral vision, taking everything in. His short-sighted dismissal was absolute, precisely as Joanna had known it would be. A crisp, heavy envelope appeared on Joanna's desk the following Wednesday, not in her usual inter-office mail slot, but hand-delivered by a nervous, fresh-faced intern who scurried away as if touching a live wire. Inside, on embossed stationery usually reserved for external VIPs, lay a formal invitation. It was addressed to Ms. Joanna Davies, stakeholder, and politely, yet imperatively, requested her presence at the Evergreen Tech Solutions merger signing ceremony that upcoming Monday morning. The wording was impeccably corporate, acknowledging her fractional stake and the absolute necessity of her approval for the expeditious and legally compliant transfer of intellectual property. Joanna, who had navigated 2 decades of company memos and policy updates, noted the subtle shift from legacy overhead to stakeholder, from invisible to indispensable. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched her lips. Her plan, meticulously laid, was unfurling with textbook precision. The irony of being formally invited to witness the culmination of an event she was supposed to be summarily removed from was not lost on her. It was less an invitation, she knew, and more a summons. It was Arthur P., lead counsel for Sterling Capital Partners, who broke the tense quiet. His gaze, sharp and analytical, had been fixed on Joanna since her entrance. "Miss Davies," he acknowledged, his voice calm and precise, completely devoid of Bryce's frantic shock. He tapped a finger on a document open before him, a copy of the 2003 operating agreement conversion. "We've been expecting you." He then turned to the assembled executives, his voice gaining a distinct edge. "Gentlemen, as you are all now painfully aware, the intellectual property transfer clause, a critical component of this $600 million acquisition, requires the explicit approval of Ms. Joanna Davies, an original equity stakeholder, as per the 2003 amendment to Evergreen Tech's operating agreement. Without her signature, this entire deal, I regret to inform you, is currently a non-starter." Bryce, visibly deflated, his carefully constructed world collapsing with the clinical precision of Arthur P.'s words. Joanna watched Bryce, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror, before turning her gaze to Arthur P. Her expression remained unreadable, a calm pool amidst the sudden tempest. "Mr. P. states the truth," she affirmed, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick silence that had enveloped the room. "The clause of 2003, detailing the intellectual property transfer stipulations and my fractional ownership, remains unrevoked, unamended, and, as you've discovered, entirely valid." Arthur P. gave a curt nod, his attention firmly on Bryce. "Indeed. Without Ms. Davies' explicit, written approval for the transfer of specific IP assets detailed within that foundational document, this merger, specifically the acquisition of Evergreen's core technologies, which constitutes the bulk of Sterling Capital Partners' interests, cannot legally proceed. Any attempt to bypass this would expose all parties to catastrophic future litigation and invalidate the entire transaction." His words were delivered with the clinical detachment of a surgeon describing an unavoidable amputation, each syllable a precise cut into Bryce's dwindling authority. Joanna met his gaze, then slowly, deliberately, reached into her worn leather folder. She extracted a single sheet of paper, folded crisply, and laid it flat on the polished mahogany table before her. Her movements were precise, unhurried, each action a calculated step. "My terms are simple and non-negotiable," she stated, her voice projecting quiet authority. "First, 1.5% non-voting equity in the newly merged entity. This acknowledges my original stake and long-term contribution without interfering with operational governance." Her eyes flickered to Bryce, who looked as though he might spontaneously combust. "Second, executive-tier medical benefits, fully retroactive from the date of my original, unacknowledged termination. And third, formal recognition in the official merger closing records as an original stakeholder and a key party in facilitating the IP transfer." She paused, allowing the implications of her demands to settle like heavy stones in the stunned silence. "My signature will be provided only upon the full and unreserved acceptance of these conditions, along with the necessary amendments drafted and signed today." Bryce erupted, slamming his palm on the table. 1.5%. Are you insane? That's almost $9 million. This is blackmail, Joanna. Pure and simple blackmail. His voice was shrill, his composure shattered beyond repair. "You think you can extort us? We'll litigate. We'll tie you up in court for years." Arthur P. nodded slowly, an almost imperceptible glint in his eye. "Indeed. We represent Sterling Capital Partners, a firm that values legal precision and the swift resolution of complex acquisitions." While your emotional response is noted, Mr. Davies, it does not alter the facts. Ms. Davies' terms are not only equitable given the circumstances, but, frankly, a minor adjustment compared to the catastrophic implications of a stalled, legally compromised $600 million merger. He turned his full attention to Joanna, his demeanor shifting to one of respectful acknowledgement. "Miss Davies, do we have an agreement on the terms as presented?" Joanna met his gaze, a quiet certainty in her eyes. Her expression remained unreadable, a perfect mask of professional composure that belied the 2 decades of simmering resentment, the countless indignities, the casual erasure of her existence within these very walls. "We do," she affirmed, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any triumph, yet resonating with an unyielding steel. From her worn leather folder, the same one that had protected the yellowed 2003 document, she produced a slender, weighty object, a solid silver pen. It wasn't an executive's expensive, flashy Mont Blanc, but an elegant, old-fashioned writing instrument, subtly engraved with initials that were now faded, barely legible. It was the same pen Arthur P. shrewdly surmised she had used to sign that obscure, forgotten clause all those years ago. The symbolism was lost on no one except, perhaps, Bryce, who was still muttering incoherently about legal loopholes and a gross miscarriage of corporate justice. Then he turned to Bryce, who stood frozen, pale, and defeated. Arthur P.'s smile remained, but his eyes held a sharp, knowing edge. "Well, Mr. Davies," he said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure every executive in the room heard the barb. "It appears that as of this moment, you effectively report to your quietest co-owner." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Bryce visibly flinched, his eyes darting to Joanna, a flicker of comprehension and, perhaps, fear, finally dawning. The casual dismissals, the years of taking her for granted, the complete erasure of her value, all of it had culminated in this precise, devastating moment. Joanna, however, did not gloat. She simply rose, pushing back her chair with a soft scrape that drew all eyes to her. Her gaze, cool and unwavering, swept over the assembly, touching Bryce for a fraction of a second longer. Her final words, delivered with a quiet authority that resonated more deeply than any shout, pierced the stunned quiet. "You thought I was part of the furniture," she stated, her voice even, resonant. "But furniture doesn't own the house." With that, Joanna Davies, the silent architect, turned on her heel. Without another word, without a backward glance at the empire she had just partially claimed, she quietly exited the pristine executive boardroom. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence, a cavernous space filled only with the echoing tremor of her words, a tremor that would surely resonate through the halls of Evergreen Tech Solutions for years to come. The era of the invisible assistant was irrevocably over.